The wind, a bitter artist, painted the city in shades of gray and bone-chilling cold. It howled through the skeletal trees and rattled the thin window panes of the small, cramped apartment where Leo and his daughter, Mia, lived. For Leo, the sound was a constant reminder of the emptiness that had hollowed out his life, an echo of the silence left behind by his wife, Sarah. He looked at his hands, once strong and capable, calloused from a life of carpentry, now chapped and raw from a different kind of hardship. They were the hands of a man who had built a life, only to watch it dismantled, piece by painful piece. Poverty was a slow, creeping frost, and it had finally reached their bones. He pulled the thin, frayed blanket tighter around his 6-year-old daughter, who was curled up on the lumpy sofa, her small face pale in the dim light. Her stomach had rumbled a sad, quiet song a few minutes ago, a sound that tore through Leo's heart with more force than the fiercest winter gale. It was a sound of need he could no longer satisfy. The cupboards were not just bare, they were monuments to emptiness. A half-empty box of crackers and a jar of peanut butter scraped clean were the last remnants of their provisions. His last few dollars had gone to Mia's cough medicine 2 days ago, a choice a father makes without a second thought. Now, there was nothing. Desperation was a physical weight, pressing down on his chest, making it hard to breathe. He had looked for work, any work, his pride ground down to dust with each polite but firm rejection. He was just another shadow in a city full of them, a man whose grief was a visible shroud that made people uncomfortable. But looking at Mia, her breath a small, warm cloud in the cold air, he knew that his pride was a luxury he could no longer afford. A child's hunger was a primal call to action that superseded all else. He had to do something. Anything. He remembered walking past it yesterday, a place so out of sync with his reality it felt like a mirage. The Thorn Estate. It wasn't just a house. It was a kingdom, separated from the mortal world by a towering wrought iron fence and a small forest of ancient, manicured trees. It was a symbol of a life so far removed from his own that it might as well have been on another planet. People whispered stories about the woman who lived there. A billionaire. A recluse. Paralyzed after some terrible accident. They said the house was a gilded cage, a silent palace where she lived alone, attended by a skeleton staff. The idea that formed in Leo's mind was born of pure, unadulterated desperation. It was a wild, foolish spark in the suffocating darkness. He would go there. He would knock on that formidable gate. He would not beg. He would offer the only thing he had left, his ability to work. He would trade his labor for a meal. A hot meal for Mia. The thought was so audacious it almost made him laugh, a harsh, humorless sound. But what other choice did he have? He gently shook Mia awake. "Hey, sleepyhead," he whispered, his voice rough with emotion. "How about we go for a little adventure?" Mia's eyes fluttered open, still clouded with sleep. "An adventure, Daddy? Is it to the park?" He forced a smile, a painful stretching of his lips. "Something like that, sweetie. A new place. A big place. Put on your coat. The one with the fuzzy hood." He helped her into her worn pink coat, the zipper perpetually stuck halfway, and pulled on his own thin jacket, which offered little more than a psychological barrier against the cold. He looked at their reflections in the dark window, a gaunt, haunted man and a small, trusting girl, two castaways clinging to each other in a vast, indifferent ocean. The walk was long, and the wind was relentless. It tore at their clothes and stung their faces. Leo held Mia's small, mittened hand tightly in his, her warmth a tiny anchor in the swirling chaos of his fear. With every step, his heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat of what if they say no. He could feel the stares of people in warm cars, their faces a blur of comfort and pity as they drove past. He ignored them, focusing on the rhythmic tap of his worn-out boots on the pavement, a march towards either salvation or the final, crushing humiliation. Finally, they stood before it, the gate to the Thorn Estate. It was even more imposing up close, a black iron testament to power and separation. Intricate leaves and vines of metal twisted together, culminating in a severe, unadorned T at the very top. Beyond it, a long, winding driveway disappeared into a grove of perfectly sculpted evergreens, hiding the house from view. It was designed to intimidate, to repel, to make someone like him feel small and insignificant. And it was working. His courage, so fragile to begin with, began to evaporate in the face of such impenetrable wealth. He almost turned back. He could almost hear the echo of Sarah's voice, a gentle whisper of encouragement, telling him he was stronger than he knew. He looked down at Mia, who was staring up at the gate with wide, curious eyes, unafraid. "It's like a castle, Daddy," she whispered in awe. "Does a princess live here?" "Something like that," he murmured, his voice barely audible. He took a deep, shuddering breath, the cold air burning his lungs. He saw the small, brass intercom box mounted on one of the stone pillars. His hand, trembling, reached out. He pressed the button. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the whistling wind. He waited, his entire future seeming to hang in that single, agonizing moment. A crackle of static broke the silence, followed by a crisp, stern female voice that seemed to carry its own chill. "Yes? This is a private residence." The voice was not unkind, but it was firm, a finely crafted wall of professional distance. Leo's own voice, when he finally found it, was a hoarse whisper, a pale imitation of his usual tone. "Hello, my name is Leo. I'm looking for some work." He could hear the unasked questions hanging in the air between them. "Who are you? How did you get this number? What kind of work?" The silence stretched, and Leo rushed to fill it, his words tumbling out in a clumsy, desperate stream. "Anything. Raking leaves, cleaning windows, scrubbing floors. I'm a hard worker. I need to earn some money for a hot meal. For my daughter." He glanced down at Mia, who squeezed his hand, sensing his distress. The disembodied voice on the other end paused. Leo could picture the woman on the other side, a housekeeper perhaps, with a starched uniform and an expression of deep suspicion. He was expecting the click of the intercom disconnecting, the finality of rejection. "I'm sorry, sir, but we are not hiring," the voice said, exactly as he'd feared. The words were a physical blow. "Please move away from the gate." "Please," Leo said, the word cracking with a shame that burned his cheeks. "Just an hour of work. That's all I'm asking." But it was Mia who changed the world. Unprompted, she stepped closer to the intercom box, her small face tilted up towards the speaker. "My tummy is making funny noises," she said, her voice clear and guileless. "Daddy says it's singing the hungry song. Can the princess hear it?" There was another, longer silence. Leo's heart stopped. He wanted to pull Mia back, to shield her from this, but he was frozen. He had failed her, and now his innocent child was begging for them. The shame was a bitter flood. Then, the static crackled again. This time, the voice was softer, the professional veneer having cracked ever so slightly. "Stay where you are." A moment later, with a low, electric hum, the magnificent iron gates began to swing inward, opening a path into a world he had only ever seen from the outside. It felt like a dream. He took Mia's hand, and they began the long walk up the winding driveway, their tattered sneakers crunching on the perfectly raked gravel. The sheer scale of the place was disorienting. The air here seemed different, cleaner, scented with pine and damp earth. There were no sirens, no city noise, just the sound of their own footsteps and the rustle of ancient trees that stood like silent, watching sentinels. The house finally came into view at the crest of a small hill. It wasn't a house. It was a masterpiece of stone and glass, a modern palace that managed to be both immense and elegant. It stretched out in long, clean lines, with vast windows that reflected the bruised purple of the winter sky. It was beautiful, but it was also cold, a fortress of solitude. As they approached the massive oak front door, it swung open before they reached it. The woman standing there was just as Leo had pictured, tall, severe, in a simple but immaculate gray dress. Her hair was pulled back in a tight bun, and her face was a mask of professional neutrality, though her eyes, a sharp, intelligent blue, held a flicker of something. Pity, perhaps, or just weary curiosity. "I am Mrs. Petrov, the household manager," she said, her voice the same one from the intercom. "Miss Thorne has agreed to see you. Wipe your feet." Leo meticulously wiped his boots on the thick mat, then helped Mia do the same. Stepping inside was like entering another dimension. The cold and chaos of the outside world vanished, replaced by a profound, cathedral-like silence. The foyer was vast, with a gleaming marble floor and a ceiling so high it seemed to touch the clouds. A sweeping staircase curved gracefully upwards into the shadows. There was no clutter, no sign of life, just polished surfaces and expensive, abstract art that felt as cold as the stone it hung upon. The air was warm and smelled faintly of lemon oil and old books. It was the smell of wealth, Leo thought, a scent he'd never known. "This way," Mrs. Petrov instructed, her heels clicking softly on the marble. She led them through a series of grand, interconnected rooms, each one more breathtaking and impersonal than the last. There were living rooms with white sofas that had likely never been sat on, a dining room with a table that could seat 30, and long hallways lined with closed doors. It was a museum of a life, not a home. Leo felt a growing sense of unease. He was an intruder here, a smudge of dirt on a pristine canvas. He held Mia's hand even tighter, his own small anchor in this strange, gilded ocean. Mrs. Petrov stopped before a set of tall glass doors at the far end of the house. "Miss Thorne is in the conservatory," she said, her voice low. "Do not speak unless spoken to, and control your child." She gave Mia a stern look, but Mia simply stared back with her wide, innocent eyes, unafraid. Mrs. Petrov sighed, then pushed the doors open. The room was a shock of life and light. A huge glass dome arched overhead, and the space was filled with a jungle of exotic plants and flowers. It was humid and warm, a pocket of eternal summer in the heart of winter. And there, in the center of it all, surrounded by orchids and ferns, was a woman in a wheelchair. The chair itself was a marvel of technology, sleek and black, but it was the woman in it that commanded the room. The light from the glass ceiling streamed down, illuminating her, making her look ethereal, like a queen on a throne. She turned her head as they entered, and that's when Leo saw her face. The world didn't just stop, it shattered. The air left his lungs in a silent, painful rush. The sounds of the room, the gentle hum of a humidifier, the rustle of leaves, faded into a deafening roar in his ears. His legs, which had carried him all this way, suddenly felt like stone, rooting him to the spot. He froze. It was her. It was Sarah. It wasn't just a resemblance. It was a cruel, impossible echo. The same sweep of dark chestnut hair, though hers was cut shorter, framing her face in a way that was both elegant and severe. The same high cheekbones and the gentle curve of her jaw. But it was the eyes that undid him. They were a different color, a cool, piercing gray instead of Sarah's warm hazel. But they held the same intelligence, the same flicker of a deep, underlying sadness that he had come to know so well in his wife's final months. His mind reeled, unable to process the vision before him. For a heart-stopping, insane moment, he believed it was her, that somehow a miracle had occurred, that death had been a lie. The name Sarah formed on his lips, a ghost of a word, but no sound came out. His throat was tight, constricted by a tidal wave of grief and shock so profound it was a physical force. He could feel Mrs. Petrov's sharp, suspicious gaze on him, feel the weight of her judgment. He could see the woman in the wheelchair, Isabel Thorne, her expression shifting from detached curiosity to a guarded confusion. Her brow furrowed slightly as she took in his strange, catatonic state. "Is there a problem?" Isabel's voice was quiet, but it carried an authority that cut through the fog in Leo's mind. It was lower than Sarah's, smoother, like polished stone, yet it struck a chord of familiarity that was deeply unsettling. Leo struggled to regain control. He blinked, trying to force the image of his wife from his mind, to separate the ghost from the living woman. He had to say something, anything, to explain his bizarre reaction. "No," he managed to choke out, the word rough and torn. "No, I'm sorry. You reminded me of someone." It was the lamest of excuses, a pathetic understatement of the cataclysm unfolding inside him. Mrs. Petrov took a half-step forward, her posture radiating disapproval. "Miss Thorne, perhaps this was a mistake. I can have him removed." "No, Mrs. Petrov. It's all right," Isabel said, her gaze never leaving Leo's face. She seemed intrigued now, her sharp mind clearly analyzing him, trying to solve the puzzle of the strange, broken man who had frozen in her doorway. "He said he was looking for work." She gestured with a slight tilt of her head towards the vast expanse of glass that formed the conservatory walls. "The windows are filthy. The storm left them covered in grime. You can start there." Mrs. Petrov will provide you with the necessary supplies. Leo could only nod, his mind still a maelstrom of conflicting emotions. Gratitude for the opportunity warred with the profound pain of looking at this woman. He felt a desperate urge to flee, to run from this place and the ghost it had conjured, but the image of Mia's hungry face was branded onto the inside of his eyelids. He had to stay. He had to work. For Mia, Mrs. Petrov led him away to a utility closet, her disapproval a palpable force field around her. She handed him a bucket, sponges, a squeegee, and a bottle of cleaning solution, her movements stiff and economical. "Do a thorough job," she warned. Miss Thorne values perfection. Leo returned to the conservatory, his movements stiff and robotic. He filled the bucket with water from a small sink in the corner, the simple, mechanical task helping to ground him. He tried to focus on the work, on the circular motion of the sponge against the glass, on the satisfying squeak of the squeegee as it wiped away the dirt, revealing the gray, wintry landscape outside. He worked with a feverish intensity, pouring all his turmoil and grief into the physical labor. He refused to look at Isabel, keeping his back to her, creating a fragile barrier of denial. But he could feel her presence. He could feel her watching him. It was a strange, unnerving sensation, the feeling of being observed by a ghost. While Leo was lost in his internal battle, Mia, untroubled by the adult complexities swirling in the air, did what children do. She explored. She toddled on her small legs through the miniature jungle, her fingers gently touching the velvety petals of a deep purple orchid. She was a splash of vibrant color, her pink coat and bright, curious eyes, in a world of muted greens and sophisticated silence. Then, with the fearless confidence that only a child possesses, she walked right up to Isabel's wheelchair. She stopped a few feet away, tilted her head, and examined the complex piece of machinery with intense concentration. "That's a fast chair," she declared, her voice ringing with certainty. Isabel, who had been watching Leo's frantic, almost punishing work, turned her attention to the small girl. A flicker of amusement, the first genuine emotion Leo had seen on her face, softened her features. "It is," Isabel replied, her voice losing some of its formal edge. "It helps me get around." Mia nodded sagely, as if this were the most logical explanation in the world. She then pointed a small, mittened finger at Isabel. "Are you a queen?" she asked. "Daddy said a princess might live here, but you look more like a queen. Your castle is very big." For the first time in what felt like a very long time, a real, genuine smile touched Isabel Thorne's lips. It was a small, hesitant thing, but it transformed her face, chasing away some of the shadows from her cool gray eyes. "No, I'm not a queen," she said softly. "My name is Isabel." "I'm Mia," the little girl announced proudly. "It's nice to meet you, Isabel." She then did something that likely no one had done in years. She stepped forward, leaned against the armrest of Isabel's wheelchair, and looked up at her with complete, unconditional trust. "My tummy stopped singing the hungry song now," she confided. "It's being quiet because it knows you're a nice queen." Isabel's smile widened. She tentatively reached out a hand, her fingers stiff and slightly curled, and gently rested it on Mia's head, on top of her fuzzy pink hood. It was a gesture of connection, a small bridge being built across an immense chasm of loneliness and wealth, and Leo, glancing over his shoulder for just a second, saw it. The sight of that woman, Sarah's ghost, touching his daughter sent another jolt through him, but this one was different. It wasn't just pain. It was something else, something more complex and confusing, a tiny, fragile shoot of warmth in the frozen landscape of his heart. Leo scrubbed the glass with a punishing rhythm, each circular motion an attempt to wipe away the image seared into his brain. The reflection in the pane was a cruel mockery, a gaunt, haunted man, and behind him, the impossible silhouette of a woman who shouldn't be there, her hand resting on his daughter's head. He felt like a man walking a tightrope between two worlds, the past and the present, and the strain was immense. He could feel Isabel's gaze on him, a silent, analytical pressure. He wondered what she saw. Did she see a desperate father? A broken man? Or just a curiosity, a temporary diversion from the monotonous, silent ticking of her life? He kept his back to her, focusing on the methodical task. Sponge, wipe, squeegee, repeat. It was a mantra of survival. He could hear the low murmur of conversation behind him, Mia's high, clear voice and Isabel's softer, deeper replies. He couldn't make out the words, only the cadence, the gentle back and forth. It was a sound that was both comforting and agonizing. It was the sound of a connection being forged, a connection that involved his daughter and a woman who wore his dead wife's face. He worked his way around the vast conservatory, the clean glass behind him a testament to his frantic energy. He was on the last panel when he felt a small tug on his jeans. He looked down to see Mia, her face serious. "Daddy, Queen Isabel wants to know if you're a ghost," she said, her voice a loud whisper. Leo froze, squeegee in hand. He slowly turned around. Mia was pointing at him, and Isabel was watching them both, her expression unreadable, a faint, wry smile playing on her lips. "A ghost," Leo managed to say, his voice hoarse. "Why would she think that?" "Because you're all quiet and sad," Mia explained matter-of-factly. "And you keep trying to disappear into the window." The simple, profound truth of a child's observation struck him silent. He was trying to disappear. He looked at Isabel, truly looked at her for the first time since the initial shock. He forced himself to see the differences. The cool gray of her eyes, the subtle lines of weariness around them that Sarah hadn't had. The regal, almost defiant set of her jaw. This was not Sarah. This was Isabel Thorne, a stranger, a billionaire, a woman trapped in a chair. And yet, the ghost of his wife lingered in the shape of her face, a painful, persistent echo. "I apologize for my daughter," Leo said, his voice stiff with formality. "She has a wild imagination." "Don't apologize," Isabel said, her voice smooth and calm. "She's a very astute observer." She paused, her gaze unwavering. "She also told me you haven't eaten today, either of you." The simple statement of fact hung in the air, stripping away all pretense. Leo's carefully constructed wall of pride crumbled. He had no defense against such a direct, simple truth. He could only nod, a short, sharp admission of his failure. "Mrs. Petrov is preparing a meal in the kitchen," Isabel continued, her tone matter-of-fact, as if she were discussing a business transaction. "You have more than earned it. The windows have never been so clean." Leo felt a surge of gratitude so powerful it almost brought him to his knees. It wasn't just about the food. It was about the acknowledgement, the dignity she afforded him by framing it as payment for a job well done. "Thank you," he whispered, the words inadequate. "Thank you." Mrs. Petrov appeared at the conservatory doors, her expression as starched as ever, but her eyes, when they flickered towards Mia, seemed a fraction softer. "The meal is ready." In the small dining room. The small dining room was anything but. It was a room larger than Leo's entire apartment, dominated by a long, polished mahogany table that could easily seat a dozen people. A fire crackled in a grand marble fireplace, casting a warm, dancing glow on the walls. In the center of the vast table, 2 place settings had been laid out. But it wasn't just a meal, it was a feast. There was a tureen of steaming chicken soup, a platter of roasted vegetables, a basket of warm, crusty bread, and a pitcher of milk for Mia. To Leo, who had been subsisting on crackers and despair, it looked like the most beautiful sight in the world. Mia gasped, her eyes wide with wonder. "It's a party," she squealed, clapping her hands together. Leo felt a lump form in his throat. He sat down, his body aching with a weariness that went deeper than just physical exhaustion. He watched as Mia, with no hesitation, began to eat, her small face a picture of pure, unadulterated joy. He served himself a bowl of soup, his hands trembling slightly. The first spoonful was transformative. The warmth spread through his chest, a comforting wave that seemed to push back against the cold that had settled deep in his soul. He ate slowly, savoring every bite, feeling life and strength seep back into him. They ate in silence for a few minutes, the only sounds the clinking of silverware and the crackling of the fire. Then, a low hum announced Isabel's arrival. She guided her wheelchair to the head of the table, her presence filling the room. Mrs. Petrov placed a small bowl of soup in front of her, but Isabel barely seemed to notice it. Her attention was on them. "Is it to your liking?" she asked, her gaze on Leo. It's more than I could have imagined," Leo said, his voice thick with emotion. "I don't know how to thank you." "By finishing your meal," she replied simply. An awkward silence descended again. Leo felt the need to fill it, to say something, to be more than just the charity case at the billionaire's table. "You have a beautiful home," he offered, the words sounding stilted and formal in the grand room. "It's just a house," she said, a note of something, melancholy, perhaps, in her voice. She looked around the opulent room as if seeing it for the first time. A very large, very empty house. "It's not empty now," Mia piped up, her mouth full of bread. "We're here." Isabel's gaze softened as she looked at the little girl. "No," she said, a real smile touching her lips. "I suppose it isn't." They continued the meal with small talk. She asked about what he was cleaning with, the specific technique he used to get the glass so streak-free. He found himself explaining the way his father, also a carpenter, had taught him to take pride in even the smallest of tasks. He spoke about the satisfaction of making something dirty clean again, of restoring a small piece of order to the world. He was careful not to talk about his past, about Sarah, about the life he had lost. He kept the conversation safe, superficial. And she, in turn, did not press. She asked no personal questions, did not inquire about Mia's mother or why he was in such a desperate state. It was a silent, unspoken agreement. They were two strangers, from two different universes, sharing a meal, their respective tragedies hanging unspoken in the air between them. As they were finishing, Mia, full in content, began to grow sleepy. Her head drooped, and she leaned against Leo's arm, her eyes fluttering shut. "I think it's time for us to go," Leo said, gently stroking his daughter's hair. "Thank you again, for everything." "You are welcome to come back tomorrow," Isabel said, the statement sounding more like a command than an offer. "There are other tasks. The floors in the main hall need polishing. The garden shed needs to be organized." Leo was taken aback. He had assumed this was a one-time act of charity. I can't afford to pay. Your work is the payment," she interrupted, her tone leaving no room for argument. "The arrangement is mutually beneficial. I have a house that requires upkeep. You have a need for work. It's a simple transaction. Be here at 9. And with that, she turned her wheelchair and glided silently out of the room, leaving Leo sitting in the magnificent dining hall, a half-eaten feast before him, his sleeping daughter beside him, and a storm of confusion, gratitude, and a deep, aching pain swirling in his heart. He had a job, but it was a job that would force him, day after day, to face the ghost of his greatest love. The next morning, the world felt different. The biting wind had softened to a crisp breeze, and a pale, watery sun was attempting to break through the blanket of gray clouds. For the first time in a long time, Leo woke up not with a feeling of dread, but with a sense of purpose. He had a place to be. He had work to do. He looked at Mia, still sleeping peacefully, her cheeks flushed with a healthy pink that hadn't been there yesterday. The sight of her, well-fed and warm, was a balm to his wounded soul. He had done it. He had provided. The memory of Isabel Thorne's face, an echo of Sarah, was a shadow at the edge of his mind. But today, the immediate, pressing need to survive was a brighter, more powerful force. He held on to that. They arrived at the Thorne estate at precisely 9 o'clock. The iron gates swung open for them without him even needing to press the intercom, as if they were expected, as if they belonged. The thought was both comforting and absurd. Mrs. Petrov met them at the door, her expression as neutral as ever, but she greeted Mia with a curt little nod that might have been her version of a smile. "Miss Thorne is in her office," she informed them. "She has left instructions for you. The polishing equipment is in the West Wing utility closet." Leo found the equipment and set to work on the vast marble floor of the main hall. It was hard, physical labor, pushing the heavy polishing machine back and forth, the drone of the motor filling the cavernous space. But Leo welcomed the exertion. It allowed him to quiet his mind, to focus on the simple, repetitive task. With each pass, the dull marble began to gleam, its surface transforming into a dark, flawless mirror. He was bringing life back to the cold stone, and there was a deep, quiet satisfaction in that. Mia, meanwhile, had been given a small stack of paper and a box of crayons by Mrs. Petrov and was settled on a thick Persian rug near the grand staircase, completely absorbed in her artistic endeavors. The silence of the great house was no longer oppressive. It was punctuated by the hum of the polisher and the soft scratch of Mia's crayons on paper. It was a sound of quiet industry, of life, however small, stirring in the heart of the silent mansion. An hour into his work, Isabel appeared at the top of the grand staircase. She wasn't in her chair. She was in a different device, a complex metal frame that held her upright, allowing her to stand, supported by mechanics and straps. She moved slowly, her hands gripping a control panel, her legs moved by the machine in a steady, gliding motion as it descended the stairs. The sight was both incredible and heartbreaking. It was a testament to her immense wealth that such technology was at her disposal, but also a stark, constant reminder of her physical prison. She navigated the machine to the edge of the hall, watching him work. "You're a methodical worker, Leo," she observed, her voice echoing slightly in the large space. "You create order from chaos." Leo switched off the polisher, the sudden silence deafening. "It's what I know how to do," he replied, wiping a bead of sweat from his forehead with the back of his hand. "My father was a carpenter. He taught me that every job, no matter how small, is a chance to make something better." "A carpenter," she mused, a thoughtful look on her face. "A builder." She looked around the hall, at the gleaming floor, then at him. "This house is full of things that are broken. Small things. A sticking door in the library, a loose baluster on the south terrace, a warped shelf in the pantry." She paused, her gray eyes meeting his. "Perhaps your skills extend beyond cleaning floors." It wasn't a question, but an invitation. A test. He understood immediately. She was offering him a chance to be more than just a cleaner, a chance to reclaim a piece of the man he used to be. "I can take a look at them," he said, his voice steady. "I still have my tools. They're old, but they work." "Good," she said with a nod. "When you're finished here, start with the library door." Later that day, after another nourishing lunch that felt like a miracle, Leo found himself in the Thorn Library. It was a room straight out of a storybook, with floor-to-ceiling shelves packed with thousands of leather-bound books. The air smelled of old paper and wood smoke from the embers glowing in the fireplace. It was a room built for quiet contemplation, a sanctuary of knowledge. He found the door that was sticking, a beautiful, heavy oak door that scraped against the floor with a loud groan every time it was moved. He ran his hand over the wood, feeling the grain, diagnosing the problem with an instinct he thought he had lost. The hinges were misaligned, a simple fix for a trained hand. He retrieved his old, worn toolbox from his car, a rusty metal box that contained the last vestiges of his former life. Opening it was like opening a time capsule. The familiar weight of the hammer, the smooth wood of the chisel handle, the scent of oil and sawdust. His hands remembered. As he worked, carefully adjusting the hinges, sanding a small section of the doorframe, he felt a part of himself click back into place. This was who he was. A builder. A fixer. Mia, finished with her drawing, came to find him. She presented her artwork to Isabel, who was reading in a large leather armchair by the fire. It was a crayon drawing of 3 figures. A tall man with brown hair, a small girl in a pink coat, and a woman with dark hair sitting in a fast chair. Above their heads, Mia had drawn a big, smiling yellow sun. "It's our family," Mia announced proudly to Isabel. "That's you, and that's Daddy, and that's me." Leo, who had just finished his work on the door, overheard her. He saw Isabel take the drawing from Mia, her long, elegant fingers tracing the lopsided crayon figures. He saw an expression of profound, heart-wrenching vulnerability on her face, an unguarded look of longing that she quickly masked. "It's a very beautiful drawing, Mia," Isabel said, her voice a little thick. "Thank you." This became their new routine. Each day, Leo would come to the estate and fix something. He repaired the wobbly baluster, planed the warped shelf, replaced a cracked window pane in the greenhouse. With each task completed, he felt a piece of his own broken spirit mending. He was no longer just the desperate man who had shown up begging for a meal. He was Leo, the carpenter. He was useful. He had value. And Isabel, in turn, began to change. The house, once a silent, sterile monument to her loneliness, started to feel more like a home. The sound of Leo's hammer, the scent of fresh-cut wood, Mia's laughter echoing in the long hallways. It was the sound of life returning. Her staff, especially Mrs. Petrov, noticed the difference. The hard lines of tension around Miss Thorne's mouth had softened. She smiled more. She spent less time secluded in her office and more time in the library or the conservatory, often just watching as Leo worked and Mia played. One afternoon, as Leo was repairing a loose floorboard in the upstairs hallway, Isabel approached him. "There is a room," she began, her voice hesitant, "at the end of this hall. It has been locked for 5 years. He stopped his work and looked at her. "It was a nursery," she continued, her gaze distant, fixed on the closed door at the end of the corridor. It was for the future. A future that never came." The words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken grief. It was the first time she had ever alluded to the personal tragedy that had led to her paralysis. Leo's own grief, a constant companion, recognized hers. It was a silent, profound moment of understanding between two people from different worlds, united by the common language of loss. "The lock is rusted shut," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "I was wondering if you could open it." Leo looked from her face, etched with a pain he knew so well, to the closed door. He understood that she was asking for more than just a simple repair. She was asking him to open a door to her past, a door she was not yet strong enough to open on her own. "Yes," he said softly, "I can." The door at the end of the hall was plain white, indistinguishable from the others, yet it felt heavier, imbued with the weight of forgotten dreams. The brass doorknob was tarnished, and the keyhole was dark with the faint, reddish-brown dust of rust. It was a door that had been sealed not just by a lock, but by a conscious act of will, a desperate attempt to contain a world of pain behind it. Leo approached it with a sense of reverence. He understood he was treading on sacred ground. He ran his fingers over the cool metal of the doorknob, feeling the stillness of the air around it. Isabel waited a few feet behind him, her posture rigid in her standing frame, her hands gripping the controls so tightly her knuckles were white. He could feel her anxiety, a palpable wave rolling off her. He chose his tools carefully from his worn metal box, a small vial of penetrating oil, a set of tension wrenches, and a delicate pick. This was not a job for a hammer or a drill. It was a job that required patience and a gentle touch. He knelt before the lock, a surgeon preparing for a delicate operation. He applied a few drops of oil into the keyhole, letting it seep into the rusted tumblers. The silence in the hallway was absolute, broken only by the sound of his own steady breathing. He inserted the tension wrench and the pick, his fingers moving with a deftness born of long practice. He could feel the inner workings of the lock, the small, stubborn pins that refused to yield. It was a lock that did not want to be opened. He worked slowly, methodically, coaxing the pins one by one. It was a quiet battle of wills, his patient skill against the lock's rusted-shut grief. He was aware of Isabel behind him, her silence a heavy presence. He did not look at her, but he could imagine her eyes fixed on his hands, her breath held in anticipation. Finally, after several long minutes, he felt the last pin give way with a soft, satisfying click. The sound, though barely audible, echoed in the silent hallway like a gunshot. The core of the lock turned. He slowly withdrew his tools and stood up, his knees cracking in protest. He looked at Isabel. Her face was pale, her gray eyes wide and filled with a mixture of fear and gratitude. He reached out and turned the knob. The latch retracted, and the door swung inward with a low, mournful creak, releasing a puff of stale, trapped air. The room beyond was dark, the heavy curtains drawn tight against the world. A faint, dusty smell, sweet and cloying, drifted out, the scent of baby powder and disuse. Isabel didn't move. She seemed frozen, unable to cross the threshold into the past she had sealed away. Leo understood. He stepped into the room first, his eyes adjusting to the dim light. He walked to the window and pulled back the heavy velvet curtains. Afternoon sunlight, thick with dancing dust motes, flooded the room, illuminating a scene frozen in time. It was a perfect, untouched nursery. The walls were painted a soft, gentle yellow. A beautiful white crib stood against one wall, its mattress bare. A rocking chair with a hand-knitted blanket draped over it sat in the corner. A mobile of smiling, fluffy lambs hung motionless over the crib. On a changing table, a stack of diapers and a tin of powder sat, as if waiting to be used. It was a room brimming with hope, a meticulously crafted nest for a life that had never arrived. Leo felt a familiar ache in his own chest. It was the pain of what might have been, a grief he knew intimately. He turned back to Isabel, who remained in the doorway, a silhouette against the light of the hall. "It's all right," he said softly. "It's just a room." His gentle words seemed to break the spell. She took a slow, deliberate step forward, her machine whirring softly as she crossed the threshold. She moved to the center of the room and stopped, her gaze sweeping over every detail. Her composure, usually so formidable, began to crumble. A single tear escaped and traced a glistening path down her cheek. "His name was going to be Daniel," she whispered, her voice fragile and broken. It was the first time she had given a name to her loss. "We had everything planned." She reached out a trembling hand and touched the headboard of the crib. "The accident, it took everything. It took my ability to walk. And it took him." She was referring to her fiancé, the other half of the we. The pieces of her story were beginning to fall into place. The car accident hadn't just stolen her mobility. It had stolen her future, her partner, her child. The nursery wasn't just a room. It was a tomb for a life she was supposed to have. Leo stood by the window, giving her space, a silent witness to her grief. He knew there were no words that could soothe such a wound. All he could offer was his quiet, steady presence. He knew what it was to stand in the wreckage of a life and wonder how to go on. After a long, silent moment, she turned to him, her eyes red-rimmed but clear. The tears had washed away some of the hardness, revealing the raw vulnerability beneath. "No one has been in this room since it happened," she said. "The staff was instructed to keep it locked. I couldn't bear to look at it, but I couldn't bear to dismantle it, either." "It's hard to let go of the hope," Leo said, his own voice thick with emotion as he thought of the small box of Sarah's things he kept under his bed, unable to part with them. "Yes," she breathed. "The hope." She looked around the room again, but this time, her expression was different. It was less pained, more resolved. "It's time," she said, more to herself than to him. "It's time to let the light in." Over the next few days, they dismantled the nursery together. It was a slow, careful process. Isabel, directing from her chair, decided what to keep and what to donate. Leo, with his gentle, capable hands, carefully packed the tiny clothes and toys into boxes. They worked in a comfortable silence, a shared understanding passing between them. They were not just cleaning out a room. They were performing a ritual of release. They were acknowledging the pain, honoring the memory, and choosing to move forward. During this time, Mia would often wander in, her innocent presence a stark contrast to the room's sad history. She would pick up a stuffed animal or a small rattle, her face a picture of curiosity. She asked Isabel, "Who were these toys for?" Isabel, without hesitation, answered her. "They were for a little boy who became a star in the sky," she said softly. Mia nodded, accepting this explanation with the simple faith of a child. "My mommy is a star, too," she said. "Daddy says she's the brightest one, and she watches over us." In that moment, the final wall between Leo and Isabel dissolved. They were no longer just an employer and an employee, a billionaire and a pauper. They were two people who had both looked up at the night sky and searched for a loved one among the stars. They were bound by a grief that transcended class and circumstance. When the room was finally empty, clean, and bare, it felt different. It was no longer a shrine to what was lost, but a blank canvas, full of potential. "What will you do with it now?" Leo asked, as they stood in the empty space. Isabel looked out the window at the sprawling gardens below, a thoughtful expression on her face. "I'm not sure," she said, "but for the first time in a long time, it feels like a room of possibility, not a room of pain." She turned to him, a real, genuine smile gracing her lips. "Thank you, Leo, for helping me open the door." He simply nodded, understanding that her thanks went far beyond the rusted lock. He had helped her open a door inside herself. The clearing of the nursery marked a profound shift in the atmosphere of the Thorne estate. It was as if a long-held breath had been released, allowing fresh air and new life to circulate through the once stagnant halls. The arrangement between Leo and Isabel settled into a comfortable, unspoken rhythm that was far more than a simple work agreement. It was a partnership. Leo was no longer just the handyman. He became the unofficial curator of the house's well-being, his quiet competence a steadying force. Isabel, in turn, found herself relying on his presence, on the simple normalcy he and Mia brought into her gilded cage. Their conversations deepened, moving from the practicalities of repairs to the quiet corners of their lives. One rainy afternoon, they sat in the library, a chessboard between them. Isabel, a formidable strategist in business, was teaching him the game. "You see the whole board, Leo," she commented, after he skillfully maneuvered his knight out of a trap she had set. "You don't just react to the last move. You anticipate." "I've had to learn to think a few steps ahead," he said quietly, his gaze on the carved ivory pieces. It was a simple statement, but it held the weight of his struggles, of planning how to make a few dollars last a week, of anticipating the needs of a growing child on his own. She understood the unspoken meaning. "I used to think that was all that mattered," she confessed, her voice soft. "Seeing the whole board. Winning the game. I built an empire by always being 10 steps ahead of everyone else." She gestured vaguely at the opulent room around them. "I won. And this was the prize. A kingdom with a population of 1. Her honesty was a raw, unguarded thing. She was showing him the hollowness at the center of her success, a truth she likely shared with no one. "It's not empty anymore," he reminded her gently, echoing Mia's words from that first day. Her eyes met his across the chessboard, and in them, he saw not the powerful billionaire or the ghost of his wife, but a woman named Isabel, full of strength, regret, and a burgeoning hope. The bond between Isabel and Mia, however, was something else entirely. It was pure and uncomplicated, a connection forged in the honest currency of childhood. Mia, with her lack of pretense, treated Isabel not as an invalid or a wealthy recluse, but simply as her friend. She would climb onto the wide, soft arm of Isabel's chair and read to her from a picture book, her small finger tracing the words. She brought Isabel handfuls of dandelions from the garden, which she called sunshine flowers, and which Mrs. Petrov, under Isabel's smiling instruction, would place in a delicate crystal vase. One day, Mia arrived with a new project. She had found a patch of neglected earth behind the greenhouse and declared it would be her secret garden. She enlisted Isabel as her chief consultant. Together, they would look through gardening catalogs, Mia pointing out the prettiest flowers, and Isabel explaining which ones would grow best in the local soil. Leo, watching from a distance as he repaired a nearby fence post, felt a complex knot of emotions. There was a profound joy in seeing his daughter so happy, so carefree. But there was also a sharp, piercing ache. Isabel was filling a role in Mia's life that he could not, a maternal space that had been empty for so long. She was becoming the queen from Mia's stories, a gentle, wise presence. He saw how Mia looked at her, with an adoration that was both beautiful and painful for him to witness. His fear, a cold, familiar serpent, began to uncoil in his gut. What was he, really, in this new world they had stumbled into? He was the help, the carpenter, a charity case who had been given a chance. He was replaceable. What if, one day, Isabel decided she no longer needed things fixed? What if she decided that Mia was the only one she wanted to keep? The thought was a poison, seeping into the newfound peace he had started to feel. It made him withdrawn, quieter. He focused on his work with a renewed, almost desperate intensity, as if by making himself indispensable, he could secure his place in their lives. Isabel noticed the change immediately. She was a woman who had built her fortune on reading people, and she could read the subtle shift in him like a stock market report. The easy camaraderie they had developed was gone, replaced by a formal, professional distance on his part. He was building a wall between them, and she didn't understand why. She decided to confront it head-on, in the same direct way she would handle a business negotiation. She found him in the old garden shed, a place that had become his unofficial workshop. He was sharpening a set of chisels, his back to the door, his shoulders tense. "Leo," she said, her voice cutting through the rhythmic scrape of steel on stone. He stopped, but didn't turn around. "Yes, Miss Thorne." The use of her formal title was a clear signal, a deliberate step backward. "My name is Isabel," she said softly. "It has been for a while now. Why are you suddenly building a fortress around yourself?" He finally turned to face her, his expression guarded, his eyes clouded with a turmoil she couldn't decipher. "I know my place here," he said, his voice low and tight. "I'm grateful for the work, for everything you've done for me and my daughter. But I'm just the man who fixes your house." "Is that what you think this is?" she asked, a note of disbelief in her voice. "A series of transactions? You fix my door, I give you a meal. You entertain my child, I let you stay? Isn't it?" he challenged, his own pain making him cruel. I'm a project for you. The broken man you can fix, just like your leaky faucet. And Mia, she's a novelty. A doll for you to play with in your empty house. The words, once spoken, hung in the air, ugly and sharp. He saw the hurt flash in her eyes, a genuine, deep wound. He hadn't wanted to hurt her, but his fear had spoken for him. You're wrong, she said, her voice quiet but firm, laced with an anger that was all the more powerful for its restraint. You see me as a checkbook and a wheelchair. You see my home as a prison. You've been so busy looking at the ghost of your wife that you've never once truly seen me. Her words were a slap in the face. He recoiled as if struck. And Mia, she continued, her voice trembling with a barely controlled emotion, is not a novelty. That little girl, with her sunshine flowers and her crayon drawings, has brought more light into this house than I have felt in 5 years. She is a gift. And you, Leo, with your quiet dignity and your capable hands, you have reminded me that a house is not a home until someone is there to care for it. You haven't just been fixing things. You've been healing this place. You've been healing me. She looked at him, her gray eyes shimmering with unshed tears. I thought we were friends, she whispered. But it seems I was just another one of your jobs. With that, she turned her wheelchair with a sharp, jerky movement and left him standing alone in the shed, the scent of oil and sawdust filling his lungs, the weight of her words crushing him. He had taken his fear and his grief and used them as a weapon, and he had wounded the one person who had shown him and his daughter unconditional kindness. The silence she left behind was more damning than any argument. The crisis came suddenly, a bolt from the blue on an otherwise ordinary Tuesday afternoon. The air had been heavy and humid all day, the sky a bruised, ominous shade of purple. Leo was on a ladder, securing a loose shutter on a second-story window, while Mia and Isabel were in the newly designated art room, the former nursery, working on a large collage project with colored paper and glue. A low, distant rumble of thunder was the only warning. Then, the sky opened up. It wasn't just rain. It was a deluge, a solid sheet of water that blurred the world into a gray watercolor painting. The wind howled, whipping the ancient trees into a frenzy. A sudden, brilliant flash of lightning lit up the sky, followed an instant later by a deafening crack of thunder that shook the very foundations of the house. The lights flickered once, twice, and then went out, plunging the entire estate into a murky, premature twilight. A moment later, the reassuring hum of the backup generator kicked in. Leo, climbing down the ladder, felt a sense of relief. But the relief was short-lived. The generator sputtered, coughed, and then died with a final, pathetic whine. They were plunged into an even deeper darkness, the only light coming from the frequent, strobing flashes of lightning outside. An emergency battery-powered light flickered on in the hallway, casting long, dancing shadows. But Leo knew, with a sinking feeling in his stomach, that those small lights didn't power the important things. They didn't power the elevator. And they didn't power the complex network of medical equipment in Isabel's room. He heard a cry from upstairs. Mia, frightened by the sudden darkness and the loud thunder. But then he heard another sound, a faint, desperate call. Leo, it was Isabel's voice, thin and strained with panic. He took the stairs 2 at a time, his heart pounding in his chest. He found them in the art room. Mia was crying, and Isabel was trying to comfort her, but her own face was pale with fear. The power is out, she said, her voice tight. The main generator and the backup. It's never happened before. My chair, the lift mechanism is electric, and some of my respiratory equipment runs on the main grid. Leo's mind, honed by years of crisis and caregiving for Sarah, snapped into focus. Panic was a luxury they couldn't afford. It's okay, he said, his voice calm and steady, projecting a confidence he didn't entirely feel. He knelt and scooped a frightened Mia into his arms. Hey, it's just a storm, sweetie. It's like a big drum solo in the sky. Nothing to be afraid of. Mia buried her face in his neck, her small body trembling. He turned to Isabel. Where is the manual override for your chair's lift? And is there a non-electric backup for your breathing equipment? The override is in the maintenance panel on the back, she said, her mind clearly clicking into a more practical gear, her fear momentarily sidelined by the need for action. As for the respiratory machine, There's a portable oxygen tank in my closet, but I haven't needed it in years. I don't even know if it's full. Okay, Leo said, his mind racing. First things first. Let's get you downstairs where it's safer, away from the windows. The problem was the grand staircase. Isabel's standing frame was too bulky, and her regular wheelchair, without the lift, was useless for navigating stairs. Mrs. Petrov, Leo called out, his voice echoing in the dark house. The housekeeper appeared at the end of the hall, a powerful flashlight in her hand, her usual composure shaken but not broken. The phones are out, she announced grimly. And the road is probably flooded. We're on our own. I know, Leo said. I need your help. We need to get Miss Thorne downstairs. He looked at Isabel. I'm going to have to carry you. Isabel stared at him, her eyes wide. In all the years since her accident, no one had carried her. She was moved by lifts, by machines, by caregivers who followed strict protocols. To be carried was an act of profound intimacy and vulnerability. For a moment, her pride, the armor she had worn for so long, bristled. But then she looked at his face, calm and capable in the flickering emergency light, and she saw the strength and determination there. She trusted him. All right, she whispered. With Mrs. Petrov's help, they carefully transferred a trembling Isabel from her high-tech chair into Leo's arms. He was shocked by how light she was, her body frail beneath the layers of her clothes. He held her securely, one arm under her knees, the other supporting her back, her head resting against his shoulder. He could feel the slight, shallow rhythm of her breathing. As he started down the stairs, carefully navigating each step in the dim light, he was acutely aware of her proximity, the scent of her perfume, the soft texture of her sweater against his cheek. It was an intimacy that went far beyond their argument in the shed. It was an act of pure, necessary trust. They got her safely to the library, the most secure, windowless room in the house, and settled her into a deep, comfortable armchair. Mrs. Petrov lit a fire, which cast a warm, reassuring glow. Mia, her fear subsiding, curled up with a blanket at Isabel's feet. The immediate crisis was averted, but a new one was emerging. Isabel's breathing was becoming labored, a faint wheezing sound with each exhale. The humid, heavy air of the storm was affecting her. The oxygen, Leo said to Mrs. Petrov. We need to find it. Now. While Mrs. Petrov went to search Isabel's suite, Leo knelt by Isabel's chair. Hey, he said softly, taking her hand. It was cold as ice. Stay with me. Breathe slowly, just like we're blowing out birthday candles. In through the nose, out through the mouth. Nice and slow. He breathed with her, his calm, steady rhythm a guide for her own panicked breaths. He was using the same techniques he had learned during Sarah's illness, the simple, grounding methods a caregiver knows by heart. He was no longer the handyman or the charity case. In that moment, he was her lifeline. Mrs. Petrov returned, carrying a small green oxygen tank. It feels full, she said, her voice strained. Leo quickly examined the regulator. It was simple, familiar. He had operated one just like it 100 times before. He fitted the nasal cannula to Isabel's face and turned the knob, releasing a gentle, life-giving hiss of pure oxygen. After a few moments, the color began to return to Isabel's cheeks. Her breathing eased, the frightening wheeze subsiding. She looked up at Leo, her eyes filled with a profound, overwhelming gratitude. The storm raged on outside, a wild symphony of wind and rain, but inside the library, a small pocket of calm had been created. By the flickering firelight, the three of them, the billionaire, the carpenter, and the little girl, waited out the storm, a small, unlikely family bound together by crisis and care. Leo had not just fixed her house. He had, in that moment, saved her life. And in doing so, he had shattered the last remaining barrier between them. The storm raged for hours, a relentless assault on the world outside. But within the firelit library, a new kind of quiet settled. It was not the empty, sterile silence of before, but a warm, living stillness, filled with the crackle of the fire, the soft hiss of the oxygen tank, and the gentle breathing of the three people who had become unlikely islanders in a sea of chaos. Mia had fallen asleep, her head resting on Isabel's lap, her small hand clutching a fold of Isabel's sweater. Isabel's own breathing was deep, and even now, the oxygen working its magic. She looked down at the sleeping child, her expression a mixture of tenderness and wonder, and gently stroked Mia's hair. Leo sat on the hearth, watching them, the firelight casting a warm glow on his face. The anger and fear from their argument in the shed felt like a lifetime ago, a petty squabble from a different world. The crisis had burned away all the pretense, all the misunderstandings, leaving only the raw, undeniable truth of their connection. He had been so wrong. He had let his own insecurities and his grief blind him to what was right in front of him. Isabel wasn't a ghost or a project. She was a woman of incredible strength and profound loneliness, who had opened her home and her heart to him and his daughter. Her breathing is shallow. Isabel's voice, though soft, was clear and steady. She was looking at him, her gray eyes luminous in the firelight. When she's in a deep sleep, it's almost silent. Leo nodded, his gaze fixed on his daughter. Sarah was the same way, he said, the name leaving his lips without the usual accompanying sting of pain. It felt natural to say it here, in this space of shared vulnerability. I used to lie awake at night, just listening, making sure she was still there. It was an admission, an opening. He was finally sharing a piece of the story he had guarded so closely. Isabel listened, her expression full of a deep, quiet empathy. The storm had stripped them of their armor, and now, in the aftermath, they were simply two people, talking in the dark. You said I reminded you of someone, she said, not as an accusation, but as a gentle invitation. The day you arrived, you froze. You looked at me as if you'd seen a ghost. This was it, the moment of truth. Leo knew he could no longer hide behind half-truths or evasions. She deserved to know. He deserved to finally say it all out loud. He reached into his back pocket and pulled out his wallet. It was old and cracked, the leather worn smooth with time. From a hidden flap, he carefully extracted a small, folded photograph, its edges soft and frayed from years of being carried. He leaned forward and handed it to her. Isabel took the photo, her fingers brushing against his. She unfolded it carefully. By the flickering light of the fire, she looked at the image of the smiling, vibrant young woman with warm hazel eyes and dark chestnut hair, her arm linked through a younger, happier Leo's. The resemblance was uncanny. It wasn't just a passing similarity. It was in the structure of the face, the shape of the smile, the light in the eyes. Her name was Sarah, Leo said, his voice thick with unshed tears. She was my wife. He began to speak, and the story he had held inside for so long came pouring out. He told her about their life together, a simple life rich with love and laughter. He was a carpenter with his own small business. She was a primary school teacher. They weren't wealthy, but they had everything that mattered. He spoke of her illness, a cruel, aggressive cancer that had appeared without warning. He described the brutal years that followed, the surgeries, the chemotherapy, the hope that rose and fell with each new test result. He talked about selling his business, then their house, to pay for treatments that ultimately failed. He described holding her hand as she took her last breath in a sterile hospice room, and the profound, world-shattering silence she had left behind. He spoke of the grief that had swallowed him whole, and the slow, humiliating slide into poverty, his every effort to pull them out swallowed by the undertow of his despair. He had failed, not just himself, but Mia. When I knocked on your gate, he concluded, his voice a raw whisper. I was at the end of my rope. I had nothing left. And then I saw you, and for a second, I thought the world had gone mad. It was like she was sitting right there, but trapped, lost. It was torture, but it was also a strange kind of comfort. Being near you felt like being near her. He finally looked up at her, his soul laid bare. I am so sorry, he said, for seeing you as a ghost, for not seeing you. Isabel was crying. Silent tears streamed down her face, glistening in the firelight. She didn't wipe them away. She reached out and placed her hand on his, her touch warm and firm. Don't be sorry, she whispered. Now I understand. She took a deep, shuddering breath, and it was her turn to open a locked door. 5 years ago, she began, her own voice fragile. I had everything. A career I loved, a reputation as one of the most ruthless CEOs in the country, and a man I was going to marry. His name was David. She told him about David, an architect who was her opposite in every way, calm where she was intense, a dreamer to her pragmatist. He was the one who made her laugh, who reminded her that there was a world outside the boardroom. They were driving back from a weekend on the coast, arguing playfully about the design for the house he was building for them, the nursery for the child they were planning. It was raining, she said, her voice catching. A truck hydroplaned. It crossed the median. I don't remember the impact. I just remember waking up in a hospital with a world of pain and a doctor telling me I would never walk again. And that David was gone. She looked down at her own hands, resting in her lap. In a single moment, my life was cleaved in two. Before and after. All the money, all the power, it meant nothing. I couldn't buy back my legs. I couldn't buy back the man I loved. She looked at Leo, her eyes full of a shared, profound understanding. Everyone looks at me and sees the billionaire, the cripple, the recluse. They see the chair, the house, the money. You were the first person who looked at me and saw a ghost. And in a strange way, it was the first time I felt truly seen. Because in so many ways, that's what I was. Just a ghost, haunting the halls of a life I was supposed to have. In the warm, fire-lit library, surrounded by the remnants of the storm, two lonely souls, a carpenter and a billionaire, found common ground in the geography of their grief. They had both lost their other half, their future. They were both survivors of a wreck. And in sharing their stories, they had created a bridge across the chasm of their sorrow, a bridge built of honesty, empathy, and the quiet recognition of a shared humanity. The storm outside was finally beginning to subside, its fury spent. And inside, a different kind of storm, the one that had raged in their hearts for so long, had also found its peace. As dawn broke, it painted the sky in soft, hopeful shades of pink and gold. The storm had passed, leaving behind a world that was washed clean, glistening, and new. The power was still out, but the silence was no longer threatening. It was peaceful. Inside the library, the fire had burned down to glowing embers. Mia was still asleep, a picture of innocence. Leo and Isabel had talked through the night, their conversation a quiet, meandering river of shared memories, regrets, and dreams. They had laid their ghosts to rest, not by banishing them, but by giving them a name and a place of honor in their stories. There was a new feeling in the room, a sense of rightness, of pieces clicking into place. The awkwardness and the misunderstandings were gone, replaced by a deep, comfortable intimacy. When Mrs. Petrov came in with a tray of coffee and pastries, heated on the gas stove in the kitchen, she found them sitting in a comfortable silence, a new, unspoken understanding between them. She simply smiled, a rare, genuine smile, and left them to it. The old order was gone. A new one was beginning. Later that morning, the power crews arrived, and the house hummed back to life. The phones worked. The lights came on. The world returned to normal, but everything had changed. The dynamic between them had been irrevocably altered. Leo was no longer just the handyman, and Isabel was no longer just the employer. They were partners, friends, survivors. A few days later, Isabel called Leo into her office. It was the first time he had been in the room since she had hired him. It was a space that reflected her before life, sleek, modern, and intimidating, with a massive desk and a panoramic view of the grounds. But today, it felt different. Isabel herself seemed different. More relaxed, more open. Leo, she began, her tone formal but warm. I have been thinking about the future. He stood before her desk, his heart giving a nervous flutter. This arrangement, it's not sustainable, she continued. He felt a familiar cold dread begin to creep in. Was this it? Was she letting him go now that the crisis was over? You are a skilled carpenter and a capable, intelligent man, she said, looking him directly in the eye. You are more than just a handyman. And I need more than just a handyman. This estate, this life, it's too much to manage alone. I need a partner, someone I can trust. She slid a piece of paper across the desk towards him. It was a formal document, a contract. I've created a new position, she explained. Estate manager. It comes with a proper salary, benefits, and responsibilities that match your skills. It also comes with a place to live. She gestured out the window towards a charming stone cottage nestled in a grove of trees on the edge of the property. It's been empty for years. It needs some work, of course. A carpenter's touch. Leo stared at the contract, then at her face. He was speechless. This was more than he could have ever dreamed of. It wasn't charity. It was a legitimate offer, a recognition of his worth. It was a chance to rebuild his life, to provide a real, stable home for Mia. And Mia, Isabel added, her voice softening. This house has come to life with her in it. I was hoping she might be willing to continue her duties as chief dandelion officer and head of the art department. A slow smile spread across Leo's face, a real, unburdened smile that reached his eyes. I think she would like that very much, he said, his voice thick with emotion. He looked at the contract, at the new life being offered to him. Isabel, I don't know what to say. Say yes, she whispered. Say you'll stay. Yes, he said, the word full of a hope he thought he would never feel again. Yes. The weeks that followed were a blur of happy activity. Leo and Mia moved into the stone cottage. It was small and cozy, a world away from the grand, impersonal mansion, but it was theirs. Leo spent his days working on it, his hands joyfully rediscovering the familiar work of building a home. He repaired the roof, sanded the floors until they shone, and built custom bookshelves for all of Mia's books. The cottage, once neglected, began to fill with warmth and laughter. His role as estate manager was a natural fit. He brought order and care to the sprawling grounds, his practical knowledge a perfect complement to Isabel's sharp, strategic mind. They worked together, side by side, a true team. He was no longer intimidated by her wealth, and she was no longer isolated by it. They were simply Leo and Isabel. The final scenes of their new life played out like a series of beautiful, heartwarming snapshots. There was Leo, in the grand library, not cleaning it, but building a set of custom, accessible shelves for Isabel, designed so she could reach every book from her chair. There was Mia, in the garden, her secret garden, now a riot of colorful flowers, reading a story aloud to Isabel, who listened with a radiant smile. There was an evening scene, the three of them in the cozy living room of the cottage, a fire crackling in the hearth, playing a board game, their laughter filling the small space. The hollow, haunted look was gone from Leo's eyes, replaced by a calm, steady light. The guarded, lonely mask was gone from Isabel's face, replaced by a soft, open warmth. And Mia, the catalyst, the bridge, was thriving, surrounded by the love of two people who adored her. They were not a traditional family, but they were a real one. A family forged in desperation, crisis, and grief, but cemented by kindness, trust, and love. They were a found family, three broken pieces that had, against all odds, found a way to fit together to become whole. The cold, silent mansion was now a home, filled with light and life. The poor single dad had come looking for a hot meal, and in the most unexpected of ways, he had found a feast that would nourish his soul for a lifetime. Sometimes, the greatest gifts are found in the most unexpected places, hidden behind doors we are too afraid to open. Leo was a man who had lost everything, searching only for a single meal to feed his child. Isabel was a woman who had everything, yet was starving for a connection money could not buy. They were two people from different worlds, trapped in their own private prisons of grief and loneliness. But a child's innocent question, a shared moment of vulnerability, and a crisis that stripped away all pretense, showed them that our deepest needs are universal. The need for kindness, the need for purpose, the need to be truly seen. Their story reminds us that a family is not always defined by blood, but by the bonds of love and care we choose to build. It teaches us that even after the most devastating storms, the sun will rise again, and that it is never too late to rebuild, to heal, and to find a new reason to hope. True wealth is not found in what we own, but in the love we give and the hands we are willing to hold in the dark. Thank you for watching. If this story touched your heart, please like this video, share it with someone who might need a little inspiration, and subscribe to our channel for more stories that celebrate the power of the human spirit. Remember to be kind, for everyone you meet is fighting a battle you know nothing about.